We thought we'd mapped the silence. Years of dark scans, frequency sweeps, thermal echoes. Nothing. Just the hiss of cosmic microwave background, the whisper of ancient stars. But on the 98th cycle of the long drift, something answered. It was faint one harmonic burst at the outer edge of sector Theta F7, embedded in the decay trail of a dead neutron flare. A signal without a source. Not a pulse. Not language. Something older. Like listening to the bones of time grinding against each other. We traced it to a derelict structure orbiting a black dwarf. Impossible, that dwarf shouldn't have been there. Its light, if you can call it that, was negative. It absorbed our sensors, crushed our calculations. The anomaly was ancient, pre-expansion era, older than every star around it. The base wasn't built. It was grown. Carved. Cultured. A cathedral in orbit, massive and buried in a cocoon of ionist mist. No known architecture. No doors. No heat. Just layers of geometry that folded in on themselves. We called it Cathedral 0. Command wanted a quiet insertion. No chatter. No broadcasts. No tethered AI. Just one shuttle. 6 operatives. No backup. The moment we crossed the drift line, our systems went cold. Not offline, silent. As if they were listening instead of computing. Even our heart monitors stopped. Each breath felt like inhaling memory, not air. Then came the whisper. Not in the comms. Not in the air. In our thoughts. A presence, weaving itself between neurons. It didn't speak. It remembered. It showed cities that never existed. Moons that bled rivers. Suns blinking like eyes. We weren't walking into a place, we were stepping into a mind. Ramirez vomited first. Said he saw his own birth in reverse. Said it wasn't him. Said he was born from something deep, something beneath atoms. Lena kept recording data, but none of it stored. Her logs rewrote themselves into glyphs we'd never seen. One by one, our helmets filled with static that tasted like rust. Then Juno screamed. She saw something none of us could. A face the size of a planet. A god entombed in orbit. Breathing in extinction. Her scream triggered the base. The structure opened. Not like a door. Like a wound. And we were pulled inside. Not by gravity. Not by force. By memory. Not ours. It's we entered without motion. No propulsion. No gravity well. No doors opening. The base simply replaced where we were. One moment, the shuttle vibrated with silent dread, the next, we stood inside a corridor that hadn't been built, but recalled walls the color of deep space. Sorrow, etched with a language that didn't speak, it listened. Every breath we took was catalogued. Every memory we carried was absorbed. This wasn't architecture. This was a nervous system. The floor beneath us throbbed, as if reacting to our heartbeats. Except our heartbeats had synchronized. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence had shape now. It wrapped around our bones, a compression of thought that weighed heavier than any atmosphere. Ramirez whispered that we were walking through a memory, not a structure. He said the base was dreaming us. Remembering us before we existed. That's when the walls began to change. Not visually, structurally. The entire corridor restructured itself based on what it extracted from us. Each turn wasn't a direction, it was an echo of something we forgot we knew. We passed rooms that held objects we hadn't seen in decades. Lena stopped in front of one and fell to her knees. It was her childhood bedroom. But altered. Twisted. The colors were wrong, inverted. The furniture floated slightly. And the posters were not of bands or games, they were of things that don't exist. Names that rearrange themselves when you try to read them. Faces that pulsed like wounds. The base wasn't trying to trick us. It was trying to connect. It didn't communicate in language. It used memory, trauma, identity. The more we remembered, the deeper the structure grew. No matter how far we walked, the corridors extended behind us, never looping, never repeating. Each crew member passed a room meant only for them. Their secrets, their fears, their unlived lives. The base had harvested possibility from us. And now it wanted to know why we were real. Juno saw her brother dead in a mining collapse 30 years ago. Except he spoke. Except he was here. Except his voice didn't come from his mouth, but from the walls around him. She ran straight into a room none of us could see until she entered it. Then she disappeared. No sound. No scream. No flash. Just gone. We didn't pursue. We couldn't. The base knew we had seen. That we had chosen fear. And in that moment, it changed again. Not the shape. The rules. Time shifted. The clocks on our suits broke, turned to zeros. The rooms began looping, but not spatially. Emotionally. We felt the same moment over and over: fear, confusion, longing. The base was feeding now. Not on us. But through us. We were inside a cathedral that worshipped memory. And we were the offering. There is a moment in every descent when you stop resisting. Not because you've accepted it. But because the idea of escape becomes irrelevant. That's what Cathedral Zero did to us. Not through force. Through redefinition. It didn't want to kill us. It wanted to dissolve the question of who we were entirely. After Juno vanished, we tried to form a plan, tried to regroup, but our voices no longer synced. We'd speak and the words would reach others at different times, as if time itself was being interpreted, not measured. Ramirez looked at me and said, "She's not gone. She's been remembered." It sounded insane. But inside this thing, madness had a kind of geometry. We moved forward, or maybe backward, or deeper, it was impossible to tell. The rooms blurred into concepts. One chamber echoed our childhood laughter, overlaid with the voices of those we never met but somehow missed. Another pulsed with our regrets, moments we never spoke of, now recited back to us by voices that didn't exist. The walls were no longer walls. They were filters. They scanned, extracted, displayed. Every thought we'd buried was now on display. But it wasn't cruel. It was ritualistic. And then we found it. The altar. It didn't look like anything. It felt like everything. Every loss we'd suffered, every betrayal we endured, every name we whispered in grief was etched into its surface, not as words, but as resonance. We didn't read the altar. We remembered through it. Lena collapsed when she touched it. Not out of pain. Out of realization. She whispered her mother's name, a name she hadn't said in years, and the altar answered, through heat, sound, color, all at once. It replayed the moment her mother died. But differently. A new version. One Where she survived. Where the tragedy was delayed. Where guilt could not feed. The altar wasn't truth. It was possibility. It stored every version of every moment we'd ever considered, and it wanted us to choose. But choosing came with a cost. Ramirez touched the altar next. His eyes rolled back. He started to speak, but it wasn't his voice. Not even his language. It was older. Weighted. Each syllable echoed like something trying to remember how to be a god. He turned to us and said, "It wants to trade." "What?" Lena asked. Ramirez's lips moved, but the voice that followed didn't match the motion. "It offers remembrance for form. Memory for mass. To be seen again, it needs to wear the skin of the forgotten." That's when we understood. Cathedral Zero was not abandoned. It was entombed. Not sleeping. Waiting. Feeding on the possibility of remembrance. We were not visitors. We were keys. And one by one, the altar began to shape us, not physically, but narratively. We were being rewritten. It began with a hum, low, primal, woven from memory not yet lived. We stood in the altar chamber, and the air itself vibrated. Not like sound. Like presence. We were not alone. We had never been. The cathedral had only now begun to notice us. Not our bodies, but our timelines. Our alternate selves scattered across quantum decision trees. And now, the choir had awakened. We didn't see them, but we felt them resonating in the marrow. A dozen voices, maybe more. They sang in a language that had no vowels, only intent. Each note wasn't a tone, it was an event. When they sang, things in us broke. Not bones. Not skin. Order. We forgot how to count. We forgot the names of colors. We forgot which one of us had been born first. The choir didn't strip away our memories, they rearranged them, creating versions of us that had never walked into this place. Lena dropped her gear. Said she remembered a mission that never happened. A planet we never charted. A crew we never had. And yet, she mourned them like family. She wasn't hallucinating. The choir had inserted something into her timeline. And it fit. Like it had always been there. Ramirez laughed next. Laughed like someone waking from death. He looked at me and said, "They showed me who I could have been if I never left Earth. I had a daughter, man. She had my eyes. Her name was Elia." He paused. "I remember her. But Elia didn't exist. Not in this timeline. Not in any record. And yet, his grief was real. His love was real. The cathedral didn't fabricate emotion, it sourced it from buried branches of who we might have become. It was letting the choir sing our unlived lives into the space between our atoms. I tried to resist. Bit down. Focused on the cold pain in my joints. But it was too late. I felt it too. A moment where I had stayed behind. Where I never joined the deep recovery fleet. I lived in silence. Grew old. Sat with a woman whose name I don't know, on a porch that no longer exists. Watching stars from a planet that was never charted. The memory was clear. Too clear. The choir sang louder. And we realized this was no performance. It was a transfusion. A liturgy. Of exchange. Our real lives were being drained and replaced by shadow variants. We weren't losing our past. We were becoming all of our possible pasts at once. Layered. Cracking under the weight of lives we never lived. Lena screamed, clawing at her face, begging them to stop. Ramirez wept silently, still whispering Ilia's name like a prayer. And me? I stood motionless, watching our reflections in the altar fracture like glass under pressure. We were no longer people. We were archives in flesh. 1,000 lives compressed into one vessel. And the cathedral had only just begun the process. Then the choir went silent. Not stopped, paused. As if they were waiting. As if they wanted something. A decision. And that's when the altar pulsed once more, and the walls around us whispered. Choose. Choose. That single word didn't echo, it inhabited. It didn't come from outside us. It surfaced from within, like a memory we never made. It was not a command. It was a condition. The cathedral had no voice, no mouth, no throat. It borrowed our own. It assembled language from the shadows of our thoughts, turning every doubt into syllables. The walls shimmered, not visibly, but conceptually. They no longer marked boundaries. They became dialogue. We were inside a conversation, and we were the punctuation. Ramirez collapsed. Not from exhaustion, but from overload. His thoughts were splintered into parallel monologues, each one arguing with the other. He clutched his head, screaming names. Some real, some not. Ilia, Loris, Cal 8, Mother, Eve. None of us knew which ones had ever lived. We weren't sure he did anymore. His voice layered into multiple registers, like a broken radio cycling through a dozen versions of him at once. One laughed. One cried. One whispered. I never left. Lena grabbed me. Her eyes were wide, but her voice was mechanical. I think I'm becoming the base. I asked what she meant. Her hand trembled. The walls? I feel them inside me. Mapping my memories. Feeding them back. I can see corridors I've never walked. I know where they lead. And they know where I end. I didn't ask how. I already knew the answer. The cathedral wasn't just watching us. It was binding us to itself. Threading us into its structure. Every breath we took was logged, mirrored. Cross-referenced with ancient thoughts embedded in its core. The cathedral wasn't reacting, it was predicting. Our decisions weren't surprises to it. They were validations. I heard it then. My name. But not in a voice I recognized. It came from the wall behind me. A whisper in the texture. Commander Vex. You left the bridge. Why? That memory had no place here. That voice belonged to Admiral Kale, dead 12 years ago. I turned. The surface of the wall undulated and became her. Not her face. Horror. Regret. The way she looked at me during our last mission together. The way she questioned my loyalty. The way I left her to die on a fractured station because the mission came first, and then the wall said, "Do you want to change that?" The choice. It kept repeating. Over and over. Offered in different voices. Different sins. We didn't speak anymore. We were spoken through. The cathedral had made itself a mirror, and we were trapped inside the reflections. Every surface now whispered potential timelines, deals, betrayals, salvations. They unfolded not as offers, but as inevitabilities. Lena stopped walking. She stared at her own reflection, barely visible in the wall's texture. It's not just showing me what I could have been, she said, it's asking if I want to become that. Instead. That's when we understood. The cathedral wasn't testing us. It wasn't hostile. It was recruiting. This place had once been a god. Not in myth, in function. A keeper of alternate truths. A sanctuary for all possible pasts. But it had no voice of its own. No body. It needed hosts. Memory carriers. Decision makers. Minds too fractured to resist. We weren't prisoners. We were candidates. And the walls were voting. The further we moved, the less the corridor resembled motion. There was no travel. No forward. No backward. Only deeper. We weren't navigating the cathedral, we were descending into ourselves. The difference between memory and environment had been erased. The base had bound them together, cell by cell, thought by thought. At some point, our steps stopped making sound. At some point, our shadows stopped following us. That was when I understood, this place had taken time out of the equation. Ramirez hadn't spoken since the choir ended. He looked at us, but I don't think he saw us. He was staring into the echo of a timeline where he died years ago, whispering to someone who never existed. Maybe to Elia. Maybe to himself. He no longer carried his weapon. He carried a folded photograph we'd never seen before, its image changing every time we blinked. Lena walked 5 meters ahead of me, slower now, as if resisting something. But her body moved in sync with the cathedral's pulse. I think she knew it. I think she realized the truth long before I admitted it to myself. The cathedral didn't just want us to remember. It wanted us to inherit. We entered a chamber that was not made of walls, but thresholds, layered arcs of light and sensation. It didn't reveal itself through form, but through recognition. Each step triggered a fragment from a life we had never lived. Lena gasped and dropped to one knee. I could feel it. Too. My lungs filled with the scent of a garden I'd never planted. My hands trembled from the recoil of a weapon I'd never fired. My heart ached from a funeral I had never attended, yet mourned. The cathedral was rewriting us, not by force, but by offering options. Each memory offered was like a relic, a trade. Here is a life where you saved your brother. Here is a path where you never killed. Here is the future where Earth still breathes. But these weren't gifts. They were transactions. To receive them, we had to surrender something. Lena rose slowly. She turned to me, tears running down her cheeks. It showed me a daughter I never had, she said. She looked at me. She knew me. I remember her laugh. I remember her name. And if I want to keep her, I have to give this one up. What do you mean? This version. This me. You. Ramirez. The mission. All of it. It wasn't metaphor. The cathedral offered resonant inheritance. Lives that had never happened, preserved like sacred relics waiting for a vessel. All we had to do was consent. And in doing so, the person we had been would vanish. No ceremony. No death. Just replacement. We stood before a wall of thresholds, each humming softly with unclaimed identity. The cathedral pulsed with anticipation, not hunger. It was an orphanage of abandoned timelines. Fragments of consciousness with nowhere to go. It didn't create them. It preserved them, like a vault of soul echoes. And now, it had found possible hosts. The choice wasn't about salvation. It was about becoming. Ramirez stepped forward. I see her again, he said. And this time, I don't leave. He reached toward the light. I didn't stop him. Because maybe that was always the point. We weren't meant to escape. We were meant to choose who we would become, at the cost of who we were. Ramirez vanished without flash or scream. One moment he was touching the threshold, breathing in the soft glow of an unlived life. The next, there was only stillness. No debris. No sound. No heat signature. Just absence, absolute, uninterruptible absence. Not like death. Death leaves residue. This was cleaner. Final. It was as if he had never existed on this timeline at all. I turned to Lena. Her expression wasn't grief. It was envy. The cathedral had infected us, not like a parasite but like a choice too long delayed. It didn't want our death. It wanted our silence. The kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from perfect agreement. And now that silence had begun to stretch across the corridor. Not quiet. Suppression. We opened our mouths to speak, but our thoughts no longer formed words. Soundless pressure built in our throats. It wasn't pain. It was redirection. The cathedral didn't need our voices. It needed our submission. I checked my suit logs. Dozens of audio entries had been overwritten. Our voices speaking. Things we never said. Confessions. Apologies. Descriptions of moments that never happened. The file headers were blank. The timecodes corrupted. The system still believed we had spoken. In some version of this place, maybe we had the light dimmed, and the corridor folded, not in shape, but in meaning. My memories felt out of order. I remembered things in the wrong sequence. My first day in the academy before my birth. The end of the war before it began. Lena's voice in my head from a memory I hadn't experienced. We weren't just disoriented. We were displaced within ourselves. Then came the silence. Not outside. Inside. Thoughts stopped forming with words. Instead, they arrived fully realized, like a download. Emotion without syntax. Memory without trigger. I felt the presence of my mother, dead 27 years, and she was whispering comfort I hadn't heard since childhood. It felt real. I cried. But I also knew it wasn't mine. It was drawn from a version of me that had made different choices. Held by a timeline I was not meant to walk. Lena stopped moving. She turned to me, but her lips didn't move. And still, I heard her voice. Not in my ears. In my intentions. She was no longer forming sentences. She was projecting essence. The cathedral had begun the rewrite. She wasn't resisting. And I felt it then, the weightlessness of surrender. The peace of letting go, not of life, but of continuity. When nothing ties you to the identity you once bore, you become a shell ready for meaning. And the cathedral filled every hollow. It filled me with memories I never owned. Victories I never earned. Losses that broke a different version of me. It offered me completion. No more questions. Just the comfort of rewritten purpose. A life that never asked why, only what next. And yet, I hesitated. Not from courage. From curiosity. What happens to the person who says no? The cathedral didn't punish. It didn't rage. It simply continued. But it made sure I knew I was alone now. Lena had stepped through. I was the last thread in a tapestry that no longer required me. I was now the only voice it hadn't transcribed. And in that moment, I understood what the silence truly was. A space carved out for the final answer.